Hello, welcome to Open Source Stories. I'm Tracy Teal, the host for today, and with me is Julia Silge. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Tracy. So my name is Julia, and I work as an engineering manager at Posit, which is a software company that makes software for data science and machine learning. And I've been there at that company for coming up on 5 years now, and I worked on a variety of things there. Before I worked at Posit, I was a practicing data scientist. Working in companies like dealing with data. And if we want to go even further back than that, my sort of origin story, if you will, when it comes to scientific computing and software. My undergrad degree is in physics, and then my PhD is in astronomy. I got my PhD at the University of Texas quite a ways back now at this point, but I was in research. I did teaching for a while, and then kind of have a little bit of a circuitous path that ended up landing me a little bit later in data science.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that. And I love how you went to your origin story and your journey because that's something that I would love to talk about is kind of what that has looked for you in the context of open source.
Yeah, so I've been someone who wrote code for a very long time, like all the way back to research experiences for undergraduates and things like that, like a long time ago, right? Like what I actually spent my time doing was writing code of various kinds. And I don't have a lot of formal training when it comes to engineering practices. And so I like software engineering. So I'm definitely one of these people who comes to computing and software with a little bit of that hacker mindset, a little bit of that like, well, we'll just make it work and we'll figure it out later, that kind of mindset. The other thing when I specifically think about open source software is that I think back to my time in grad school, and I think about the tools that I use, the software that I, sort of built on top of for my data analysis pipelines and stuff. And it was all open source software. Like it was all, when I look at it now, and I'm like, oh, I identify, whatever the thing was that was being used in astronomy departments back in the early 2000s, like that. It was like from a sort of very like literal sense, according to the licenses, it was open source software, but that really didn't mean anything to me. Like I don't even really knew what it I probably literally didn't know what it meant. Like I was not familiar with the licenses and what does this mean in terms of how it's distributed or how it came to be or who made it. But I didn't have any understanding of what the open source community was like. If anything, the fact that it was open source probably at the time made me think that it wasn't for me. That it was like that has nothing to do with me. Like it's none of my business. That's that's like some guy somewhere by himself in a room. And he's probably a jerk, and I don't want to know. Like that was that was my if I had any mental understanding of what open source software was, it was that it was disconnected from my interests, my values, my ways of working. And it was really not until much later, kind of when I came back into or I would say re-entered a kind of different aspect, a different sort of kind of came at the world of software from a slightly different angle when I was working in data science, that I learned a lot more about what open source software is like, what open source communities are like, how stuff gets made, how ideas are generated, how people build tools to solve their real problems, that I really came to much of an understanding. Like I feel like although I have used open source software for a long time, it was not until much later that a sort of different level of exposure to it changed my whole understanding of what it was like.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I really love that because there is that place of being a user and using the tool to get the job done and like that really being the important thing to really getting more of a glimpse behind that curtain and like revealing all the things behind it, right? That it's
Well,
not just the lines of code, but the people and the community and the ways
yeah.
of working. And yeah, what did that, as you begin to learn more about that, like what did that feel like for you? What did you learn?
It's interesting that you said that about like getting a glimpse behind the curtain, because my experience was that getting a glimpse behind the curtain opened up a world to me that it was for me, that because I had ideas about how something might work or might be a little improved, or because I even like I had a need, because I was like, oh, I would really like to do X with my tools, and I'm kind of starting to baling a wire together, but oh, could actually this be a reusable tool that is useful not just to me, but to like other people who are in similar situations? It was I mean, in many ways, that transition from being someone who was a user through to someone who kind of had like glimpses of what it was like, through to someone's like, oh no, actually I can do this. Like, first of all, amazing and wonderful, but then, I mean, like literally transformational for my life and career. Like, in terms of the kinds of opportunities I've had, the ability, like the people I've been able to collaborate with. Like it was a rewarding kind of set of changes, but like more than a like beyond sort of like personal interest and reward, like totally changed my life in terms of the things that were became available to me to do.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, that's really exciting that it opened all those doors for you and the transformation that it had in your like life as a whole, like your friends, your colleagues, your ways of working. Um and I'm curious both like maybe like what your first open source contribution was in the sense of like how did you find it easiest to get started, and also um kind of maybe what you found the most exciting or rewarding, and that just like kind of felt different as you made that transition.
Yeah. So I would say, the sort of what was at the boundary, right, of starting to understand what are open source projects like, what happens with them. I was starting to blog, and I was writing these blog posts with the idea that they would be that they would be something for hiring manager to look at, and to, yes, maybe to have a conversation during a job interview, and for them to like, as a very like portfolio style kind of blog post. And as I was doing them, and doing certain kinds of data analysis, I started running up against some maybe some deficits, I guess, in the open source data science community, of like some tools that didn't really exist yet, that I was kind of trying to put together some things that were fulfilling the need, but I was trying to do something that turned out a lot of people were wanting to do. And so I don't really have often of someone's first, open source contribution will be something like updating docs, or writing, making some small change. But actually, the first sort of open source thing that I did was in partnership with someone who was extremely generous, and um, a little more experienced than me in this particular area. But like the first thing I did was make a reusable package that like other people could like make a new package like that other people could then use. And so the reasons why this was possible is that I was doing it with someone else. And that really again wasn't something I maybe envisioned. Like I really did have this vision of open source software being something that solo people did in rooms by themselves. But my first open source project was a deep collaboration with another person, like literally working together in a professional collaboration that has been super rewarding across. I mean, we did that, and then we ended up writing a book together. Like it was like we were able to build something that has proven really useful to a lot of people that neither one of us would have done on our own.
That's really exciting and interesting. And I kind of asked that question because it's something I'm curious about. I was in bioinformatics, and my first open source work was writing my own open source packages. Not necessarily, honestly, that anyone was going to immediately use them, but I was writing the software to solve a problem and put an open source license on it, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think that there's some value to starting actually on your own project rather than contributing to an existing open source project. They're like different paths, different models, but I feel like there's a lot of conversation about get started in open source, contribute to docs, contribute to this, but another path is to write some small open source package that solves a problem that you have.
Yes.
And I think an even better way to do it is like in partnership.
Yeah.
Right. Like with a pair of people, that's like better than by yourself. One, just to have a thought partner, especially as you're getting started. So I think that's just like such an interesting and exciting way to get started in open source that then maybe we don't talk about as much as a pathway in. It's kind of like the value of sandboxes.
Yeah. No, I love that framing for it because it is so true. And the other thing I think that highlights is that if you have a real problem, building a tool to solve that problem, like to make some certain kind of task easier, like you are the perfect person to work on that, right? Like if it's your problem, you are the perfect person to work on that. And then it is so common that someone else has a similar problem, right? And that when we can learn the skills about how to make slightly more general purpose solutions, that improves our whole open source ecosystem so much.
Yeah, I love that. I want to go back to what you were saying about the blog, because that sounded like a motivating factor. And that's also something that has really been a running theme throughout your career. I mean, you've been blogging for a long time, and kind of since probably blogging really became a thing. And, what blogging has been and stuff has, sort of changed over time and the number of people. But yeah, how has that been important to you as a part of your career in your life?
That I think is I've been thinking about this through different discussions with people lately because I'm kind of maybe mid-career-ish right now, and I kind of came of age in like let's say like late 90s, turn of the millennium is kind of when I like came of age into kind of professional adult life. And I have been a pretty early adopter of various internet communication mediums. I have someone that I follow somewhere. I can't remember exactly who said something like a text box with a submit button hates to see me coming. Like, it's so true. It's so true. Like, give me somewhere that has like a text box to type in and a submit button to publish. And I'm like, yes, yes, give it to me. I want to, I had various styles of blogs, microblogging, like I've done all the stuff when it comes to even like, I'm old enough to remember Web 2.0, right? Which is like, oh, you can make the website. I was making websites before that, right? Like in the sort of era when you had to know a little bit of coding to be able to make websites. To be clear, the kinds of websites I'm talking about here are not necessarily professional type things, right? But it was about personal expression for me. It was about like being able to say who I was, what I was thinking about, and that totally transitioned to my more like my professional life, like my ability, like being able to keep a vlog, especially in the last decade or so, like a blog where I have a lot of control about the hosting. I have a lot of control about like if who hosts me now, I don't like them, I can switch it, right? If the technology that I use to make the website, my website now, if I don't like it or if something happens, I can switch. Like I have a high degree of ownership in like my own stuff, right? Like, and that is that definitely, that ethos for me is driven by this sort of adulthood I have of adulthood, whole experience of being on the internet, being a person on the internet. And I think for me, as I think about this over the span kind of my adulthood, for me, like bringing myself to working a bit publicly on the internet has felt like power, has felt like has felt has felt empowering, has felt like I have um control in what I get to say, how I say it, how I communicate who I am professionally. Like for me, the ability to communicate in these online spaces has been like for me it's like, aha, the gatekeepers are gone, I can publish, like that's what it has felt like. And the I think it's fair to re-examine that, like how true is that always. And I think that there is some significant re-examinations of that happening, especially when it comes maybe not to your professional identity, but maybe to things that are more about your non, like yourself as a person. Like how much do we want to put ourselves out there? Like how much do we get when we give that up, right? Kind of like give that access to people. But partly of because of the age I am, the experiences I had, I still do largely experience bringing myself what I think, what I'm thinking about, the projects I'm working on. I do largely still experience that as super positive, but like super, but not just positive in a fuzzy way, like positive in a very empowering way. Like it gives me, when I think about, I'm super happy at my current employer, right? But the fact that I have a public data science persona that is associated, of course, with my employer, but not like they don't own everything I write. Like, right, like I have my own platform, my own website, my own blog. Like it's like, okay, I think about my own communication about my work, like packages that I have built, ways to use them, ways of analyzing data, approaches to analyzing data. Like I have largely, and I still do largely experience that as quite positive, and I have experienced positive outcomes from investing in that. I actually think there's a little bit of a contrarian, or I don't know, like something that is getting rethought. And part of why I think that is that I actually see people younger than me making different choices, like making different choices about how out there they make themselves. And so I don't know where this is all going, right? But I would say that for in my career and in my life, the ability to have a high level of autonomy and in control in how I put information out there about who I am, especially as a professional, has extremely paid off and has been super positive for me. I don't know. Have you thought about these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is so interesting. And, I love what you do. And also what you were saying about exploring even different mediums, they're like, because you do videos, right? I mean, so
Yeah,
you've really kind of kept up with, the different ways of communicating. And I think like what you said in there is, about choice and empowerment, and that this is the right choice for you,
yeah,
right? And that empowered you. Some person might make a different choice and that might feel empowering to them,
yeah, yeah,
but that you do have that option, right? There isn't the gatekeeper, and that you could choose to do this communication. And I think everything you said is so true about like the positive impact. I mean, I certainly know the positive impact that you've had through this work. And I also think it was interesting what you said about, um, you wrote a package and you got to talk about it.
yeah, right.
Because actually, I think that's really interesting, both in that you get to set the narrative, but also that more people learn about it. And I
Yeah.
think that's a challenge in open source is, you write the code, but then, if people don't know about the project, then you might not have as many users, it might not be as impactful, and that doesn't always need to be the goal, but it's a part of the process,
It is.
really.
And like working in open source, there's a big overlap, I feel like, with these things we've been talking about. Like, how much of ourselves do we bring to a publicly available, to the public, for some definition of the public, right? How much of ourselves do we bring that? There's huge overlap there with open source software because typically, like typically, like you can feel quite exposed. It can feel quite exposed, where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just, all of me is out here. Is this code that I'm writing super bad? Or like, oh my gosh, I embarrassed myself by doing something wrong, like, oh no, was I wrong on the internet? But like and it is, I think that having experience in open source software has allowed me to hold being right a little more lightly because I kind of have, just through exposure therapy. Oh, I was wrong. Oh, I was wrong. It's like, okay, no, that's okay. I can be wrong. I can be wrong, and I'm still okay. Like, I am still, like, that doesn't mean I have to feel super bad about myself as a professional or as a person because I was wrong. I think that in many ways that is quite healthy. And then if I think about maybe my experiences in various, ways of blogging or being online that were maybe not about open source software, like what did I learn there that I did bring to open source software? And I would say a lot of that sort of comfort with like not having to hold a lot of defensiveness, right? And that helps both in being able to identify if we've made a bad call and change it in a technical perspective, but also so much helps being able to understand when people are coming to, say, a GitHub issue and they have something that is wrong, and like, how, like, am I gonna approach this, like, especially on a big project, like yet another issue with us, with either us, there's a sort of a variety of terrible ways to respond to that, like either super defensiveness, like, I'm right, this person is
Yeah.
wrong, um an eye roll of, I cannot believe here's another person who doesn't get what I'm doing. Like dismissiveness. There's like defensiveness, there's dismissiveness. And I do think that the sort of online experiences I had leading up to my time in open software really did help me um uh parse feedback with a sense of humanity, with a sense of can I see this person as another human being? Can I react with sort of a as low amount of ego as possible, right? Like as much humility and openness as possible. And there is kind of I feel like entering an interesting kind of intersection about what does it mean to build open source software and what does it mean to be a human being on the internet? Like there's a huge sort of set of intersecting issues there that are pretty interesting, I think.
I'm just writing down different phrases you just said as as like ethos and bumper stickers. But I mean, I think like that parse feedback with a sense of humanity, I think is so important, and just like kind of the inner work you have to have done to
Yes.
be able to do that well, right?
It is so much about it is so much about like how do I view myself? Like how comfortable and I'm like, okay, here we are, like with how much sort of internal stress do I hold myself to bring to these things. It's interesting. So I'm in the situation in my professional life right now. I have been paid to work on software in public, to work on open source software and other kinds of software in public. And it has been very interesting to bring like new members on my team for whom it's like new. And it's really interesting seeing, and I do really try to give space to people who come onto my team for different levels of comfort with how out there they are. Because I don't think it is a requirement to be maybe as out there professionally as, say, I often am. Like, how accessible do people feel like I am? I'm probably on an extreme end. And I think I reaped the rewards from it, but it also comes at cost, right? And other people, even on my team, are kind of at different stages or like different levels of comfort and are like, I don't I don't necessarily like I'll feel comfortable doing X but not Y, and you're like, great, great. Let's like I think that is good and okay.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and the one that you said that I think should be a bumper sticker is I can be wrong and I'm still okay.
Oh
Right.
boy.
And that it's a muscle and that you have to develop, right? That you've been wrong and you're still okay. And maybe
Yep.
you're wrong again, but you're still okay. Right. Like I think that's a hard thing about working openly is that vulnerability of being wrong. I mean, also you can be right and still be okay. Like
Yep.
you're
Yep.
not always wrong either, right?
No, no,
So
no.
it's both sides of those. I think that's really important. And
Yeah.
I mean, and what you're saying about, the sense of, humility and humanity, I think also comes to working in teams, right? And not all of open source is, as you say, some more team and some more individual. But I'm curious what you have found to be like strengths about working in teams. You mentioned like that paired. What does it mean to you to work in teams? Like, how does it feel different?
Yeah. No, that's a really great question because I have worked on projects that are more one person sized, and I have worked on sort of in like a pair a couple of times, and then on kind of small teams. My current team that I work on is probably the biggest team that I worked on, at least in the last 10ish years in my sort of current iteration of my career. And I think as I think about what how do dynamics play out, teams I think tend to allow people to specialize a little bit. And then people who are
Mm,
naturally good at one thing tend to, want to spend time on that. But I think actually, one thing I feel like I'm growing to believe is that on a healthy team, you actually don't have too much over specialization. I'm gonna give you two examples here. So one example is let's say parsing user feedback. And let's say, like reading GitHub issues, trying to draw connections between different GitHub issues, paying attention when someone blogs about how they're using your tool and being like, oh, look, they had a hard time with this. Maybe we should just fix that, or, so that's an example of kind of systems thinking, of like drawing connections, of answering human beings, with your own words, right? Okay, so I think on teams sometimes some people will naturally come easier to them, and then they'll do more of that. They'll do more of that work, and I'm in that bucket, right? Like I am in this exact bucket where I'm like, oh, I love thinking about how a system works all together, like having a slightly like higher level view of like, how is everything we're building, how is it working together? So I tend to gravitate towards this kind of thing. And I think there is I actually think it can be a little bit dangerous if only the people who are really good at that ever do that work. And I think it's because it can be viewed as not as important work, or as easier work, or people don't understand what is involved in it. I'm going to give you another example now. Okay, like doing work that is about like building the software, like picture managing GitHub actions, and or like, oh, this sort of complicated build process breaks, and or like, oh, it was working and now today it breaks, and like, how do we manage the actual delivery of the software? Like, how do we actually, and some people really gravitate to that, and we'll tend to do it more, and we'll tend to be like, oh, it broke, let me go dig in and pick it up. I again think it's kind of dangerous for only the people who are really good at that to do that kind of work. And I think, specialization is natural, important. You don't need everybody on your team always being super capable of doing every single thing on your team. But I'm coming to believe that over reliance on that kind of specialization does not help us understand how a team works together and the kinds of work that people do. And in the team that I am leading now, I am noticing that we work together better, and we are more aware of how what we do impacts other people when there's actually a little bit of people working past their comfort level in something that
mhm.
maybe they're not as naturally good at. I think there's some tension there, of course, because we don't want people spending a ton of time doing stuff they don't want to, or they're not as good at. But I when you asked about team, that actually is, I feel like, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
That's really interesting. I really like that way of thinking about it, and I think it also appreciates that all of these things are skills that can be developed.
Yes.
So even if someone isn't become an expert, by being engaged in it helps people better understand and appreciate that skill, maybe build shared language. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and maybe not the way that all teams work, and maybe will become even more as important, as things get more complex.
Yes. Right.
There might
No.
be a tendency to
Yeah.
specialize, but in fact, maybe that might not be the right direction,
Yeah,
for a
to
team
like
to
to
work less
lean super
effectively. But
hard only
yeah,
into highly
yeah,
specialized things. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
This is definitely that is something that has come up for me more when I worked on bigger projects, rather than like,
sure,
because on a one person size project, you kind of handle it all,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Well, I love that. And yeah, thank you so much for talking. As we wrap up here, there any winter things that you particularly enjoy?
I do love colder weather, and I live somewhere, so I live in the American West in the mountains, and it's actually pretty pleasant being outside in the cold here because it's fairly dry. So even if it is quite cold, it's actually pretty like you can go outside without being too bundled up. So I love a winter walk. I love a walk outside. I like to try to maintain my regular walking in the winter, but it of course does make it even better to come inside, have my fire on, have a cat or two sitting on me. It makes it even better when you come back inside.
Always the cats.
Yes, yes,
That's the important part.
that's right.
Totally
That's
agree.
right.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for talking with me and being a part of this podcast. Really just loved hearing your stories and love and appreciate all of your work. So
Tracy,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.